Hello!
And welcome to Larry's Library.
Hello, welcome to Larry's Library. We're continuing to read Pinocchio. Poor Pinocchio's hanging in a tree. The assassins hung him because they were trying to get the sovereigns out of his mouth, but he wouldn't give them to him, so they hung him and said, well, we'll just hope you'll be dead when you come back tomorrow. So the chapters are getting longer, so I am only going to read 2 chapters tonight to kind of keep the time a little bit short for everyone. So, chapter 16. The beautiful child with blue hair has the puppet taken down, has him put to bed, and calls in 3 doctors. That's the title of the chapter. Excuse me, cover your mouth when you cough. Whilst poor Pinocchio, suspended to a branch of the big oak, was apparently more dead than alive, the beautiful child with blue hair came again to the window. When she saw the unhappy puppet hanging by his throat and dancing up and down in the gusts of the north wind, she was moved by compassion. Striking her hands together, she made 3 little claps. At the signal, there came a sound of the sweep of wings flying rapidly, and a large falcon flew onto the windowsill. "What are your orders, gracious fairy?" he asked, inclining his beak in a sign of reverence. For I must tell you that the child with blue hair was no more and no less than a beautiful fairy, who for more than 1,000 years had lived in the wood. Do you see that puppet dangling from a branch of the big oak? I see him. Very well. Fly there at once. With your strong beak, break the knot that keeps him suspended in the air, and lay him gently on the grass at the foot of the tree. The falcon flew away, and after 2 minutes he returned, saying, I have done as you commanded. And how did you find him? To see him he appeared dead, but he cannot really be quite dead, for I had no sooner loosened the running noose that tightened his throat than, giving a sigh, he muttered in a faint voice, Now I feel better. The fairy, then striking her hands together, made 2 little claps, and a magnificent poodle appeared, walking upright on his hind legs, exactly as if he had been a man. He was in the full-dress livery of a coachman. On his head he had a 3-cornered cap, braided with gold. His curly white wig came down onto his shoulders. He had a chocolate-colored waistcoat with diamond buttons, and 2 large pockets to contain the bones that his mistress gave him at dinner. He had, besides, a pair of short crimson velvet breeches, silk stockings, cut-down shoes, and hanging behind him a species of umbrella case made of blue satin to put his tail into when the weather was rainy. Be quick, Madrono, like a good dog, said the fairy to the poodle. Have the most beautiful carriage in my coach-house put to, and take the road to the wood. When you come to the big oak, you will find a poor puppet stretched on the grass half dead. Pick him up gently and lay him flat on the cushions of the carriage and bring him here to me. Have you understood? The poodle, to show that he had understood, shook the case of blue satin that he had on 3 or 4 times and ran off like a racehorse. Shortly afterwards, a beautiful little carriage came out of the coach-house. The cushions were stuffed with canary feathers, and it was lined on the inside with whipped cream, custard, and Savoy biscuits. The little carriage was drawn by 100 pairs of white mice, and the poodle, seated on the coach box, cracked his whip from side to side like a driver when he is afraid that he is behind time. A quarter of an hour had not passed when the carriage returned. The fairy, who was waiting at the door of the house, took the poor puppet in her arms and carried him into a little room that was wainscoted with mother of pearl, and sent at once to some of the most famous doctors in the neighborhood. The doctors came immediately, one after the other, namely a crow, an owl, and a talking cricket. I wish to know from you gentlemen, said the fairy, turning to the 3 doctors who were assembled round Pinocchio's bed, I wish to know from you gentlemen if this unfortunate puppet is alive or dead. At this request, the crow, advancing first, felt Pinocchio's pulse. He then felt his nose, and then the little toe of his foot. And having done this carefully, he pronounced solemnly the following words. To my belief, the puppet is already quite dead. But if unfortunately he should not be dead, then it would be a sign that he is still alive. I regret, said the owl, to be obliged to contradict the crow, my illustrious friend and colleague, but in my opinion the puppet is still alive. But if unfortunately he should not be alive, then it would be a sign that he is dead indeed." "And you? Have you nothing to say?" asked the fairy of the talking cricket. "In my opinion, the wisest thing a prudent doctor can do when he does not know what he is talking about is to be silent. For the rest, that puppet there has a face that is not new to me. I have known him for some time." Pinocchio, who up to that moment had lain immovable like a real piece of wood, was seized with a fit of convulsive trembling that shook the whole bed. "That puppet there," continued the talking cricket, "is a confirmed rogue." Pinocchio opened his eyes, but shut them again immediately. "He is a ragamuffin, a do-nothing, a vagabond." Pinocchio hid his face beneath his clothes. "That puppet there is a disobedient son who will make his poor father die of a broken heart." At that instant a suffocated sound of sobs and crying was heard in the room. Imagine everybody's astonishment when, having raised the sheets a little, it was discovered that the sounds came from Pinocchio. "When the dead person cries, it is a sign that he is on the road to get well," said the crow solemnly. "I grieve to contradict my illustrious friend and colleague," added the owl, "but for me, when the dead person cries, it is a sign that he is sorry to die." Chapter 18. 18. The next chapter. Chapter 17. Pinocchio eats the sugar but will not take his medicine. When, however, he sees the grave diggers, he takes it. He then tells a lie and his nose grows longer. That's when the nose grows longing parts that happens. The growing longer part. As soon as the three doctors had left the room, the fairy approached Pinocchio, and having touched his forehead, she perceived that he was in a high fever that was not to be trifled with. She therefore dissolved a certain white powder in half a tumbler of water, and offering it to the puppet, she said to him lovingly, "Drink it, and in a few days you will be cured." Pinocchio looked at the tumbler, made a wry face, and then asked in a plaintive voice, "Is it sweet or bitter?" "It is bitter, but it will do you good." "If it is bitter, I will not take it." "Listen to me. Drink it." "I don't like anything bitter." "Drink it, and when you have drunk it, I will give you a lump of sugar to take away the taste." "Where is the lump of sugar?" "Here it is," said the fairy, taking a piece from a gold sugar basin. "Give me first the lump of sugar, and then I will drink the bad bitter water." "Do you promise me?" "Yes." The fairy gave him the sugar, and Pinocchio, having crunched it up and swallowed it in a second, said, licking his lips, "It would be a fine thing if sugar was medicine. I would take it every day." "Now keep your promise and drink these few drops of water, which will restore you to health." Pinocchio took the tumbler unwillingly in his hand and put the point of his nose to it. He then approached it to his lips. He then again put his nose to it, and at last said, "It is too bitter, I cannot drink it." "How can you tell that when you have not even tasted it?" "I can imagine it. I know it from the smell. I want first another lump of sugar, and then I will drink it." The fairy then, with all the patience of a good mamma, put another lump of sugar in his mouth, and then again presented the tumbler to him. "I cannot drink it so," said the puppet, making 1,000 grimaces. "Why?" "Because that pillow that is down there on my feet bothers me." The fairy removed the pillow. "It is useless. Even so, I cannot drink it." "What is the matter now?" The door of the room, which is half open, bothers me." The fairy went and closed the door. "In short," cried Pinocchio, bursting into tears, "I will not drink that bitter water. No, no, no." "My boy, you will repent it." "I don't care." "Your illness is serious." "I don't care." "The fever, in a few hours, will carry you into the other world." "I don't care." "Are you not afraid of death?" "I am not in the least afraid. I would rather die than drink that bitter medicine." At that moment the door of the room flew open, and 4 rabbits as black as ink entered, carrying on their shoulders a little beer. "Oh, what do you want with me?" cried Pinocchio, sitting up in bed in a great fright. "We are come to take you," said the biggest rabbit. "To take me? But I am not yet dead." "No, not yet. But you have only a few minutes to live, as you have refused the medicine that would have cured you of the fever." "Oh, fairy, fairy!" the puppet began to scream. "Give me the tumbler at once! Be quick, for pity's sake, for I will not die! No, I will not die!" And taking the tumbler in both hands, he emptied it at a draught. "We must have patience," said the rabbit. "This time we have made our journey in vain." And taking the little beer again on their shoulders, they left the room, grumbling and murmuring between their teeth. In fact, a few minutes afterwards, Pinocchio jumped down from the bed quite well, because you must know that wooden puppets have the privilege of being seldom ill and of being cured very quickly. The fairy, seeing him running and rushing about the room, as gay and as lively as a young cock, said to him, "Then my medicine has really done you good." "Good, I should think so. It has restored me to life." "Then why on earth did you require so much persuasion to take it?" "Because you see that we boys are all like that. We are more afraid of medicine than of the illness." "Disgraceful! Boys ought to know that a good remedy taken in time may save them from a serious illness and perhaps even from death, and they should wear their mask." Oh, wait, no, that's not in here. Never mind. "Oh, but another time I shall not require so much persuasion. I shall remember those black rabbits with the bear on their shoulders, and then I shall go immediately, take the tumbler in my hand, and down it will go." "Now come here to me and tell me how it came about that you fell into the hands of those assassins." "It came about that the showman Fiery gave me some gold pieces and said to me, 'Go and take them to your father,' and instead I met on the road a fox and a cat, 2 very respectable persons, who said to me, 'Would you like those pieces of gold to become 1,000 or 2? Come with us and we will take you to the Field of Miracles.' And I said, 'Let us go.' And they said, 'Let us stop at the Inn of the Red Crawfish.' And after midnight they left. And when I woke I found they were no longer there, because they had gone away. Then I began to travel by night, for you cannot imagine how dark it was. And on that account I met on the road 2 assassins in charcoal sacks, who said to me, 'Out with your money.' And I said to them, 'I have got none, because I had hidden the 4 gold pieces in my mouth.' And one of the assassins tried to put his hand in my mouth, and I bit his hand off and spat it out. But instead of a hand I spat out a cat's paw. And the assassins ran after me, and I ran and ran until at last they caught me and tied me by the neck to a tree in this wood, and said to me, 'Tomorrow we shall return here, and then you will be dead with your mouth open, and we shall be able to carry off the pieces of gold that you have hid under your tongue.'" "And the 4 pieces, where have you put them?" asked the fairy. "I have lost them," said Pinocchio, but he was telling a lie, for he had them in his pocket. He had scarcely told the lie when his nose, which was already long, grew at once 2 fingers longer. "And where did you lose them?" "In the wood near here." At this second lie, his nose went on growing. "If you have lost them in the wood near here," said the fairy, "we will look for them, and we shall find them, because everything that is lost in the wood is always found." "Now I remember all about it," replied the puppet, getting quite confused. "I didn't lose the 4 gold pieces. I swallowed them inadvertently whilst I was drinking your medicine." At this third lie, his nose grew to such an extraordinary length that poor Pinocchio could not move in any direction. If he turned to one side, he struck his nose against the bed or the window panes. If he turned to the other, it struck against the walls or the door. If he raised his head a little, he ran the risk of sticking it into one of the fairy's eyes. And the fairy looked at him and laughed. "Oh, what are you laughing at?" asked the puppet, very confused and anxious at finding his nose growing so prodigiously. "I am laughing at the lie you have told." "And how can you possibly know that I have told a lie?" "Lies, my dear boy, are found out immediately, because they are of 2 sorts. There are lies that have short legs and lies that have long noses. Your lie, as it happens, is one of those that have a long nose." Pinocchio, not knowing where to hide himself for shame, tried to run out of the room, but he did not succeed, for his nose had increased so much that it could no longer pass through the door. And that's the end of chapter 17. The title of the next chapter will be Pinocchio meets again the fox and the cat and goes with them to bury his money in the field of miracles. He never learns, does he? Maybe he doesn't, maybe he does.
And he told a lie again.
Again?
He said he followed it. He would get sick and die immediately.
Yeah, he's got a long nose. Yeah.
And he was crying.
Too bad politicians don't have that kind of a thing where the nose gets longer when they lie. Yeah. There would be there would be a great demand for plastic surgeons to, give nose reductions.
And
Thank you very much. This has been Larry's Library. Have a good evening.